What's up, dudes? Welcome back to another episode of Rhomas Men's Team. Pretty simple. We are a group of guys helping each other make progress towards each other's goals. If you're new to the channel, awesome and welcome. If you want to help support the channel and join our pro team, head over to romasteam.com/pro, where you can contribute to us on a donation basis. We also give you access to exclusive content, mastermind groups, etc., etc. So anyway, hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you on the team.
We are live. What's up, bros? Wes, I was just telling you before we started, I figured we'd jump in. It took a while to sink in, but when we were talking about the flight stuff, I just remember us were talking about being in Chicago. Dude, I was so fucking mad. You were talking about that, and I was sitting there just like, dude, I'm so fucking... I recognized it later. I was like, I was so fucking mad.
Oh, really?
I thought of that. Oh, my God, dude. I just, for some reason, it made me laugh. I was like, dude, I was so pissed off. I didn't realize. I was just like talking like, well, blah, blah, blah. And afterwards, I like reflected on it. And I'm like, dude, that pissed me off.
Dude, it's funny you say that because it definitely is a triggering conversation. And just so everybody knows, well, I'll give people context in case they weren't here on Friday. So I proposed the situation that I was in a long, long time. It was years ago, literally. But it was an interesting social dynamic, which was I was on an airplane and a few rows back, there was a child screaming and screaming for almost the duration of the flight, which was about 5.5 hours long. And there was a gentleman sitting 2 seats away from the child. And I would say about 85 to 90% of the way through the flight, he said something kind of like a smart remark. It wasn't anything, he wasn't yelling or anything like that. He said, basically said, can you please figure out a way to get your child to stop screaming?
Yeah.
So anyway, so then I said, I personally, just so everybody knows, I personally land on the mother side, right? I would not say anything if I were the guy, and I would feel bad for the mother, right? Because I can empathize with that. I can also empathize with him though. But then where I thought it was kind of out of line was the stewardess came up and said something to the guy, almost and said it loud enough so everybody around him could hear. So it kind of called him out. So just so everybody knows, so that's kind of the background. But every time I pose that question to somebody, it does trigger a high level of emotion.
Yeah.
When I ask business guys who don't have any kids or who have kids but haven't seen them in 25 years, they all say the same thing. They're like, yeah, it's ridiculous. That person should basically drive instead of fly because they're subjecting the entire plane to the tyranny of their child. Mm-hmm. And then when I obviously talk to mothers or fathers or especially who have small children, they're like, no, well, that guy doesn't understand, blah, blah, blah. So I think the interesting part, Matt, you go ahead. Is there anything else you want to elaborate on that? Yeah,
no, that was it. It was just recognizing, 'cause I've been doing one of my main focuses, I'll say, has been really observing myself, react in real time. Even if sometimes it'll that'll get away from me and then I'll think back and I'll be like, damn, that actually did get me kind of activated, let's say.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
That's all. And I literally that day, I believe I had to fly with a child, and I was just sitting there it's you're like, come on, let's go. You're like, how's this going to go? Yeah. So yeah, no, and it's one of those things too, where it's it get like you were saying, it just all depends on what your perception is and what your experience is within those things. Cause it's yeah, dude, I know in the past I've been on a plane with kids crying and been like, oh my God, shut up. Yeah. Although I do I don't know, for some reason that noise does, I think I'm used to that from being in a house with so many people growing up that I'm just kind of yeah, whatever. Yeah. But yeah, it was just something, like I said, it wasn't anything really, to me, it was just interesting, damn, because I'm always wondering, what can get my goat like that? And it's okay, well, there's a thing. And I also wanted to make sure I didn't come off as being, nasty or snippy.
No. You would never have to worry about that with me. Anyway, you know that. So I think it actually got me thinking a lot, too, just in general. I think what happens in disagreements is, and let me know if this is off. So visually, imagine you had kind of a bullseye. Well, that's being right. And people oftentimes, including myself, I think it's human nature, when you say something and you have your opinion, you want the other person to land on your bullseye, right? You want them to be right. And your definition of right is your opinion versus being reasonable, which is, if you could think, they have their own bullseye, right? It's okay, well, both of those are reasonable. For example, I don't think the goal should be to be right. It should be, can we both be reasonable together? And can I understand your line of logic to that end conclusion? I think the best example for me is is you like vanilla ice cream, I like chocolate. Both of them like it, but if I'm trying to convince you to like chocolate because that's right, well, that's not reasonable. What's reasonable is, okay, at a certain level, we have a commonality of belief, right? Ice cream is made of sugar, fat, heavy cream, right? Like it's reasonable that we both enjoy ice cream. It would be not reasonable if I said, well, hey, you have to like vanilla instead of chocolate, or vice versa. So I think if the world tried to, especially men, if we and definitely in relationships, if we just tried to get to a point of, yeah, that's reasonable, right? Like, and then leave it there, right? Like leave it there. Like, oh yeah, totally understand how you could see it that way. Totally understand how, and we're never going to be able to get on the same spot because we have different upbringings or we have different taste buds, right? Like, so I've used this model in my relationship, and it works wonders. Like when you're in a heated battle with your significant other, and then you just pull out, you're like, okay, that's reasonable, right? Like I wouldn't do that. That's not the thing that I would do, but I can see how you got there.
Yep.
Right. And I think with the plane, I think, both sides can understand. Like, so for instance, like the guy could understand how the baby freaking out is clearly reasonable because it's like half the things that babies do, right? Is freak out. The wife, the mother could probably understand that she was probably anxious getting on the plane to begin with. As I imagine most parents are. There's a reason she's anxious because reasonably, right, it's going to piss people off around her, right? So it's a reasonable conclusion that this would happen. Like, it's not like that guy freaked out and she's like, what? Like, where in the world is this coming from? I had no idea this was in the buffet of options that could have happened, So I think if the world, if we tried to get there of like, what is reasonable, then what is my version of right? Oh man, I think it would really help a lot of people, including myself, make a lot of progress in relationships.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's it's a huge one, especially when it's like, because a lot of times when people have their little bullseye, they're trying to like steer people towards for some form of force or coercion is usually the method of just being like, what are you, an idiot? Something like that, where it's like, and it's happening on a large level, I think, socially right now. With like, a lot of the, and not to like get like off topic, but a lot of like the way people are perceiving like social dynamics and like race and culture. And it's like, you have these people being like, basically with their boot to people's necks being like, if you don't stop being a racist, I'm going to fuck you up. And it's like, well, that's not going to make people not hate people. That's just, you're throwing gas in the fire, in my opinion. Yeah. But yeah, it is like, how can you just kind of like seek to understand as much as possible? And I genuinely think this is why people need to, in my opinion, start some form of contemplative practice where they're able to like marshal their focus and just kind of watch their mind do what it does from almost an impassionate perspective and go like, again, in the thing of like, obviously I'm biased on the side of the mother of the kid, but it's like, you're a businessman, you're traveling. Like, what if you just let go of the desire to control the ambiance of the plane and just sat there and just listened to the sound of a screaming child without attaching a negative label to it? It's like, that's probably not a bad thing to cultivate within yourself. And then, with the mom, like, what if you could chill out so that like, if someone said that, you could just kind of make a joke and be like, hey, yeah, I know this sucks too, bro. Sorry. What do you want me to do? So, but yeah, man, I encountered a situation with customer service this weekend where they slashed our kid's seat like months ago when we flew with it. They somehow literally, dude, cut clean. Like the seatbelt of the baby seat just got slashed. So we're like, well, we can give you $50. I'm like, that's not enough money for it. And they're like, look, all I can do right now is $50. And this is what the lady told us. She's like, but next time you guys fly, how many more are you coming here? She's like, we're like, yeah, we'll be here a couple more times this year. Just come to the thing. We'll just loan you a baby. So you don't even have to pack it or bring it. We'll just loan you one. You come, you use it, you bring it back, drop it off. So, all right, cool. We did that the last 2 times. We show up. It's nighttime, dude. The baby's tired. We're all way ahead of our schedule. This lady just goes, we can't give you a car seat. We're like, what?
Yeah, I was about to ask you that. Are you talking about, you're talking with an airline right now?
Yes.
Are you flying on like an American version of an airline? Like,
Southwest.
What? And it's like this negotiation of like, hey, I'll loan you this thing, like maybe next time. What is that?
I have no idea.
Are you sure you were talking to an employee? Like,
yeah, they were genuinely like, and this was down in like baggage handling, because that's where the problem originated. They're like, oh, when you come, we'll let you just borrow ours. And we're like, okay, because they have loaners there for some reason. We found out because they slashed ours. Yeah, we're like, and everything was cool. We're like, all right, we'll just fly, we'll borrow one, we'll leave. It had never been interrupted. And then this lady, so this lady's like, no, you can't have it. Her and Brittany start going back and forth. Everyone's tired. Yeah, so the whole situation, we're going back and forth. And then finally, so I'm like, all right, like, this is getting nowhere. I'm like, what do you want? We don't have a car seat. What should we do? What should we do? I genuinely, I'm out of, I don't know, like, should we just, like, put her on our lap? Like, that's probably not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
The lady out of nowhere, after arguing back and forth, just goes, oh, well, the rental car agency will probably give you guys. Okay, thanks. It could have saved an immense amount of time, and I called the one manager a robot. Well, I asked whether or not he was a robot or a human being, but I wasn't sure. But I'm saying, I'm like, dude, like, all of that, when you get out of your own way of like, this is the wrong person, I'm the right person, and it's like, here's the situation, guys. What do we do? We're all here. We are now. What shall we do? And rather than being like, you're this, you're that, just being like, putting all your cards on the table, like, I don't know, what do you want me to do? And instantly it was like, oh, just go to the rent. And now it's like, okay, cool. Now we can just, every time we rent a car seat, problem solved, forever, awesome. But it turned into this like heated emotional thing. Or even I was getting angry. It was insane. And it was just kind of like, and I'm like really cognizant not to like lash on people or anything like that, but I was still pissed because like you're getting that just kind of like, well, sir, corporate policy. And I hear people talking that mode of being, I'm just like, fucking dude, shut up. I don't care. I don't want to hear this right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, it's just like, as soon as we removed emotion from the situation, as much as possible, the solution arose, bam, we can all go our own separate ways. We don't have to fight and clash. It's like...
Yeah. You hit on a couple things there. Number one, have you ever read the book, what is it called? Never Split the Difference?
I've read like a quarter of it. I have it on my Audible.
So good. So one of the things there is he says you use your radio FM DJ voice, which is you make your voice very low, almost like this, and say questions like, how am I supposed to do that?
Yeah.
Right, very relaxed, like how because apparently, and this guy was a hostage negotiator. I would highly recommend the book to everybody. Hostage negotiator for the FBI, and ended up teaching at Harvard. Apparently, he's like the most expert of the experts. Anyway, he says, well, what that forces people to do is get out of their limbic system, out of their fight or flight system, and then get back into the prefrontal cortex because they have to go through the analysis of like, oh, what should this guy do?
That's kind of interesting. I never thought about that.
It forces them to like kind of slow down, and that's also the reason for using the lower, calmer voice, but then also using like a deeper bass voice because it shows like a bit of like dominance, not like a little squeaky voice. Anyway, but also one thing that you use, which I have noticed is a trigger for a lot of people, including myself, is name calling. Right, like when you say like, "Hey, is that guy a robot?" Or something like that. I've noticed that in intimate relationships as well. Is we want to start putting identity tags on somebody, and when you do that, oh man, like I get triggered at it like as well.
He was pissed. He was pissed off.
Yeah.
He was very pissed, and he did say, he goes, "No, sir, I'm not a robot. I'm a manager at Southwest." I was like, "That's exactly what a robot would say, bro." I feel bad. I genuinely feel bad about it, but we were. It was like 9:00 at night, and I was like a kid crying in a fucking stroller next to me while this lady was like, "Sorry, sir, it's corporate policy," and I'm like, "Fucking Christ." Yeah, it's always a work in progress. But no, I agree, dude. It's like as soon as you it's beyond personalizing the situation when you're like, well, you're a this now, and they're like, I'm not a that, you're a this, and you're like, I'm not a this, you're a that, and rather than being like, again, that was the only thing that solved it. Finally, just being like, genuinely, what should we do? And it was just like, oh, well, you can go do that. And it was just like, oh my God, you could have just said that right away. Yeah. But again, it was just all that fucking.
Dude, there's so much excess around debates that have basically nothing to do with debates. This is why humans are so funny. It's why humans are so funny. It's like we're trying to solve a problem, but because you call me a robot, now I'm going to give you a very formal answer, right? Like to reestablish dominance, and then you come back with another dig, right? So it's this, all of a sudden you're 3 miles away from like the core problem. It's so interesting. So it is hilarious though. It does feel good to like name call and then to double name call somebody to confirm the original name call.
It's funny because it does feel good and it also doesn't, because I walked away from that with just like this horrible fucking feeling, and I was like, dude, that was so unnecessary, and again, it's like, I don't really beat myself up for that stuff, but I'm always learning from it. And I'm like, next time that situation arises, it was before I would have been even worse. And I was like, that was definitely an improvement of how I would have handled it. But it's like, that can go 9 million steps further. It's just, Yeah. But again, it's like, that's, you can't be more correct in saying, I'd be curious to hear other people's opinion on this. But like, when you take that when you start to pay attention to yourself, how like certain things elicit certain feelings in you. I do it with my own relationship all the time. I'm feeling myself getting activated. You know, she's doing something that just bothers me. Sometimes I could make a very good case as to why that's the wrong thing to do. Sometimes I think I'm right, and upon further investigation, I'm like, she actually has a good point here, which would piss me off even more, which would then make me double back to try to figure out how to be right in that situation, just for like my own ego.
Yep.
The thing I've been really working at is just kind of like letting go of all of that stuff and like just trying to find common ground. And like, again, even though I'm pissed doesn't mean I'm necessarily right in this situation. It sounds so stupid, but like, dude, that's helped us, I feel like, tremendously of being able to, and then, you know, if I genuinely still have a good point, being like, well, no. And rather than being like, aha, and you're wrong and I got you and all that other stuff. And it's like, dude, I swear to God, it's a very difficult thing to get out of. And as soon as it even gets there, one of us just goes, let's just take a pause here, or like, stop. Just let's just chill out. Within 5 minutes, the whole thing evaporates into like just what we're talking about. And it's insane how quick that can escalate.
Yeah. Do you do anything to diffuse situations?
We genuinely, and again, I think I've talked about this before. We have like a pause mechanism we both agree on. That if it's like, if I'm getting too much, or if one of us will call pause. And again, it even still, the call of pause will get either her or I to be like, fucking pause.
Yeah.
But you just do, you kind of do that, walk away, come back later, and it's like, and the thing I've been doing too is even if I feel 100% vindicated in what I'm talking about, but I still got activated to the point where I engaged in an argument, I will say like, I'm sorry we fought. Like that's what I'm sorry for. It's like, I'm genuinely sorry. It's not like a cop out. Like, even though, like, fucking motherfucker, I swear to God that, it's bullshit. But I can be like storming like, I'm right. I still, if I get activated and it leaks out at all, I'm like, my bad. I apologize for that. I should have done that.
Yeah. No, that's understandable. I think, to reiterate, for me, a game-changing thing in my own psychology has been expanding the surface area of the win zone to seeing reason on both sides, not to getting somebody to think exactly how I'm thinking. And then also requesting that the other person, lightly suggesting that the other person says something similar back to me. Like, oh, okay, I wouldn't do it that way, but Wes, I can understand how you got there, or I see what you're saying. Because humans like to feel validated, and honestly, not only the feeling of validation, but particularly when it comes to, let's say, intimate relationships or close relationships, there needs to be some sort of understanding of the logic to get there, because that is my hedge in the future for you and I. Do you know what I mean? Like, if we encounter this situation again, first of all, not you and I, but let's say my girlfriend and I, we should only be debating on things that are serious, right? Like on almost like value-based things.
Yeah.
Right. So if I can't see how she got there, then there's something off in the value system, like in the value beliefs. I should at least be able to see how she got there, vice versa. Because if we don't, then it increases the probability of something like that happening in the future, where we both treat each other in an off way because we don't agree with the other side of, like, the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Or like, I think what I got from that is that, like, you're not even making an effort to comprehend where they're coming from. You're just hearing the end product of their line of thought and being like, what the fuck? No. Rather than being like, well, how did you, let's walk through, how did you arrive at this? I just, that makes so much sense, man. And even, dude, I got a good, and it's funny because, like, within those things, because, we're all trapped in our own minds or egos or whatever. So it's like, I'll have an idea. This is the best idea in the world. If anyone's on the other side of it, they're, it's like, especially with her, oh, it's just a problem. This is why you're doing this to me, blah, blah, blah. So I was like going to sign up for this, like, 2 year, it's only 4 weeks, but they're spaced out across 2 years, like intensive training in a thing called holotropic breath work. Okay. And, I'm like, it's right up my alley. It seems really cool. And I was talking to this lady about it, and she had me sold on it, pretty well. And, but the thing is, the timing was so bad. It's like, it's like, there's so much going on and all this stuff. And, it would be better if I kind of did it a little later. But I was so gung-ho. I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm putting all the dates out. And Brittany's kind of like, yeah, man, I mean, you can do this and all, but, like, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And I'm kind of like, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, you're going on a trip, doing all the normal shit of like, what the fuck, blah, 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 blah. So I'm thinking about all this stuff. And then, so again, I'm right, she's wrong. I'm thinking of how to, like, rather than, like, seeing the whole picture, I'm just trying to win this weird little power struggle. And then, we're sitting there talking, we're going, it hadn't gotten heated, but I'm kind of getting irritated because she's just presenting me with things that I genuinely didn't think about, that I'm kind of like, fuck.
Yeah.
And then so at one point she's like, and again, I'm in my head in this moment, I'm still fucking right. I'm like, oh my God, this is bullshit.
Right.
And she was like, have you like researched any other ones? That was the absolute fucking arrow right through my chest. I was like, what? I mean, like, and she's like, have you,
Totally.
dude, I started looking into it. Long story short, the thing that I had almost, that I was in kind of like about to join into is seeming kind of off in certain ways that she kind of elucidated because I was so excited about it. I kind of blinded myself to them.
Sure.
So what I perceived in the moment as like annoyance and this and that and you don't understand was exactly the thing I was missing with my thinking. It just it's tough to swallow that pill in that moment. It's the worst tasting medicine of being like, fuck, you're right. It sucks.
Yeah.
I hate doing it, but like looking back on it, I'm like, fuck, you kind of, you pointed out some stuff. And then like later I kind of, whatever, not without getting into too much detail. It was just kind of like, the feedback I got from the person being like, hey, this actually might not be the best timing was so weird and kind of almost manipulative that I was just like, thank God I didn't fucking agree to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can completely understand. So that way now you both, right, like can understand each other, how you feel about that particular thing. Because like Ray Dalio said, in my opinion, I agree with him. Everything's a machine. It's just a pattern. And humans are supposed to be pattern recognition machines until we get our emotional biases in the way. Like, I'll give another example. Let's just say, for instance, like I had somebody reach out to me on Instagram. Let's just say that, and let's say it was a female. And if my girlfriend were to see that, then I would probably defend it like naturally, just my own bias would be like, it was nothing. This person just reached out because she heard a podcast. And so on. And let's just say I responded, which by the way, this is a true story up until this point. I did not respond. This girl reached out and it was like clearly, right, could go down a very bad road. And let's just say if my girlfriend saw that, if I tried to convince her and defend myself to get her to believe that I am right, which she would never, ever, come to the side like of that exact of, oh yeah, Wes is right on this. Like if I try to defend it versus if she said, okay, if I said, hey, like, it was like kind of almost like a fan reaching out or somebody who would watch one of our videos or podcasts, whatever, and was just giving compliments. And so I responded, and just said, thank you. Like, do you see, like, there's nothing in the language that says like, oh, let's meet or like, let's continue the messaging, et cetera. Like, can you see where I'm coming from? And if she could say like, yeah, I see that's reasonable, but I still don't agree with it. And then she would explain her side to me. It's like, well, can you see how it'd be reasonable on my side if I just stumble on this message? Right, between you and this other female, right? Do you see how it'd be reasonable that I would be upset about that and start to shake some of the foundation of trust? And it's like, oh yeah, I could totally understand that. So again, only part of that story is true. I actually never responded to the female because you can just anticipate, right, where the sequence of events is going to go, and it's not worth the distraction, obviously. But then the biggest benefit of that is if you have that reasonable discussion versus right discussion, then in the future, right, I should now know what her value beliefs are around that specific pattern. And then if I'm a good partner, not inch down that road, right?
Yeah.
Because we allowed ourselves to understand the circumference of reasonableness. And then that way in the future, because it will inevitably happen again, some version of that will happen again. Well, we now have the pattern recognition to understand where each other is coming from, and then hopefully to not make that violation again. I think the biggest problem is when somebody refuses to acknowledge the logic behind somebody else. Like, no, I just don't see it that way. Agree to disagree, right? Like, it's like, yeah, that feels really good. That statement was made to like make people feel good. Agree to disagree.
I hate agree to disagree, bro. I fucking hate that. It makes me so angry. Well, just agree to disagree. And it's like, no, because we both have to agree to that. I don't agree. I hate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And just to give people like, because it seems, again, a lot of this stuff seems maybe kind of subtle of like, well, yeah, maybe. It's like, dude, if I had just entrenched myself in my own rightness, I could have potentially squandered. I think the thing cost like $10,000. I could have like severely disrupted the fucking flow of like a lot of stuff we had going on at home and family wise, and then I could have been deeply again. I'm not saying that's exactly what this thing was. Maybe it's not that, but I've been skewed towards being like, yeah, maybe this thing's a little more wishy-washy than I previously thought.
Yeah.
And then I could have just been deeply disillusioned by the fact that I'd made like a pretty grave error in my judgment, and it all would have traced back to me being like putting on the like the I'm right earmuffs and being like no, and just like going forward, which again can be helpful if you're genuinely, if it's something that you have like I'm 100% on board with this. but like, you know, the doubt was actually there, and it was just like, damn, fuck, you're right, I didn't think about that. So
yeah, another tool that might help people, it helps me a lot, is I actually do think at times, almost like in the situation you were in with Southwest, I do think at times it does make sense to establish some sort of dominance, or at least some sort of, you're not going to push me around.
yeah,
I do think at times like that's required. I do think there's certain ways to do it. I have noticed a tool that I use is future telling how the discussion is going to go, and doing it in a very fast and intelligent way where it gets them to know that I'm not a dummy, right? So for instance, like, let's say if it was reversed and the guy said something kind of off-putting to you or called you a name. So what I would say then is like, okay, look, let's take a real quick pause. So you just called me a name. Here's what I could do. I could call you a name back. You could call me a name. And then all of a sudden we're 10 yards away from the core problem. So let's not go down that road. And obviously we don't want that to escalate, right? Because who knows where that could escalate to. That's not a good idea, right? And I would probably like stand up a little larger, like, you know, just some more like subconscious types of things, not trying to be like a He-Man, but also to say it's like, you are not going to overstep on my boundary. So, and I don't want to overstep on yours, giving him respect back. It doesn't make sense for us to do that. We're trying to solve a problem. So like putting that fire out before it even starts to getting back to the issue. I think that tool has helped me tremendously.
Shit, I think
still
it
there?
froze. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I think, again, just keeping as calm as possible, I think, is like, for me, is the number one thing. I'm just being like when I finally had my wits about me, it was just kind of like, all right, so you know, we're all going now to Southwest corporate policy. Now that's how I think now. That's the lay of my land. That's how I see reality. What should I do according to Southwest corporate policy? Where is their thing about putting kids into a car without a car seat? Like, what are you advising me to do on behalf of Southwest with my child? And that's when they were like, you know, that's like bunch of like legal, that's like kind of like legal, like, what are you advising? You advising me on behalf of Southwest to put my kid in the car without a car seat? Like, I'm just curious. That's when it became like, go to the rental place, blah blah blah. I was like, okay, thank you very much. But yeah, I think you're right. You can do that in a way where you're not like a total, because some of the corporations, by the way, have a whole level of customer service to seed out who will be like, okay, sorry, like, you just will go, dude, it's a real thing, man. So it's like, how can you kind of put your foot forward, kind of be like, hey, no, and then kind of keep going. Like, we had
exactly. So. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like that, reestablishing dominance or not being pushed around, and then working around them linguistically, like doing linguistic gymnastics to like get to the core words. Like, I know what you're doing. You're trying to see if I'm one of the people that will be filtered out and just walk away from this. Well, that's not me. So can we just skip the middle part and escalate me to the manager or whatever, who I need to discuss, who can actually solve the problem?
Yeah.
And then they'll probably come back and say, no, I'm sorry. So I get it. Please just put me to a manager, like something like that.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at the thing right now. Troy Boy was saying that I'm sorry, I'm kind of reading this right now. Okay, so he said he got put in a space where he was given the other person's space to be open with how they feel, and initially, it feels uncomfortable, dude, when people initiate this kind of like let's just talk and be. I've been with Brittany for 6 years now, and like I had to like talk to her about something I didn't want to talk about yet last night, and it still always feels uncomfortable, but I every single time feel better afterwards when I like open up things that I don't want to talk about. It's insane, dude. It's and it was all related to that email with that stupid fucking thing I wanted to join and do. And it was basically like, well, I was like, well, let's read this lady's email, and it's just a bunch of bullshit. But every time I'm like, well, here's how I actually feel. I have this like hesitancy towards sharing it. I swear to God, every single time I'm like, not only that, but you end up feeling closer to that person.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because you kind of got through the war together, and now you have a bond that was like forged in that fight.
Dude, and even Gunther saying something that he had a babe try to like basically run from a date, and he hounded her down and was like, what the fuck are you doing? And they
I gotta see this. Where is this? Troy went through something similar, and then we can ditch.
Damn, dude. Yeah, and I think again, Gunther, nice. I think it comes from a point of like, what I read through that is like, people can get so hung up on that whole situation, like, what the fuck, oh my God, I'm embarrassed, but just being like, hey, what are you doing? If someone's like seems all disorganized or like they don't know, it's like, again, I think you're right to be like, yeah, that's an insane way to handle that situation. Like, what the fuck are you doing? So,
Gunther, do you mind if I ask? I think I can read between the lines given the location that you're at, but was there alcohol involved in either of your bodies, especially her body, during this situation? Oh, my ex never let me speak my mind or how. Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah, there was a few Tito's.
dude. Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's very interesting, dude. How these kind of dynamics play.
Yeah, there's a book. There is a book. What was it called? It was I think it might have been called Attached on Relationships, and it talked about the attachment styles. Like some are like basically like you've run away, some get closer, and some kind of maintain positioning, like just where they're at.
I think it's like anxious, avoidant.
Yeah. So it seems like if that's what she's doing, very likely she has some sort of avoidant personality or like avoidant disposition towards conflict in relationships. So yeah, if you can be the guy that says, hey, like, let's just talk through this. The tricky part though is very difficult to do that when there's alcohol. And honestly, I don't know what you found about this, Matt. I'm always surprised at how much alcohol you do not have to drink to get off dramatically.
Yes.
Like you only have to consume a tiny bit for it to skew the entire like conversational landscape. It's not, you don't have to have 10 drinks. It could literally be, especially for a girl, it could be a half a glass of wine and all of a sudden you're like, oh, she only had a half a glass. No, right? No. Same thing for me. If I had a half glass of wine, I would not use the same line of reasoning that I am right now. Like being clear-minded.
Well, the thing is, I go back and forth. Like I think the abuse of alcohol, I don't see really any real merit to it. I think it just makes you feel bad and just brings about bad things. If you take somebody who is anxious to share their feelings and they drink a very moderate amount, a very small amount, say they just have one glass of wine over dinner and divulge something they had been kind of like, I don't know how to feel. I honestly do think sometimes that can be effective for people. To like,
without a doubt, because lowers inhibitions.
Yeah, but you know, I just think it's the problem is it's what they call like kind of a sticky substance, and it becomes then relied upon as a crutch. Where you know, it's I've had it like I've had it in past relationships where I'm like, you go out, I have something kicking around the brain, I don't know how I can share this. Over dinner we have a glass of wine. Now I'm just gushing, dude. I'm just blah, blah, blah. You know, sometimes that goes well, sometimes that goes bad. So it's like I could see it being useful in those moments, but when you kind of, again, then it's like, okay, well then every time I do something uncomfortable, I should be a little drunk. And it's like, yeah, that's where for me it peters out. And it's like the ultimate thing is to really face that uncomfort, push through it, and then that's when you get the ultimate payoff. It's like I can empathize why people might need it for that kind of thing personally, but I also will say when you just kind of push through that discomfort and hash things like that out anyway, you know, I think that's where the true value lies. So I do agree with you. Like I can see why it's useful. I also like just thinking back on all that other stuff. It's like, you know, it's typically not the best to have that kind of crutch, or just like to not examine why you might need one and sit with whatever feelings, you know, are coming up without it. So yeah, I agree with you. I had to think through it, but it's like, yeah, it's been helpful, but looking back on the long-term situation, it's like, no, it obviously didn't help totally, because again, you need to be in a space where you can share without any kind of inebriant.
Yeah, and the I think one of the challenging parts is human communication is actually like crazy precise in a certain way, although you would never really think that, right? It's kind of like catching a football. If you had to build a machine to catch a football, do you have any idea how incredibly complex that is? Like the machine, like let's say like a moving machine, a robot would have to run down the field, judge the landscape of the grass, see if there's any divots, right? Judge the wind, judge all of these things, judge the speed of the ball to be able to put out its, you know, mechanical hands and catch it. Although humans can, like, you know, a decent athlete can catch a football 95% of the time. It's such an incredibly precise thing that we think is like, you know, if I were to throw you a pass of a football and you dropped 3 of them, I was like, yeah, what the hell? They call you Butterfingers or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, although it's like an extremely intense like calculation. I think same thing with human communication. Although words are not exactly like to the decimal, and facial expressions and tonality, human communication is like actually extremely precise. Like I can perceive if you raise your eyebrows a certain way, or if you look away when I'm saying a certain thing, or if your chest raises a little bit. Like I'm doing this all in the background. And I think that one of the negative things of alcohol, because yes, Matt, I totally agree with you. One of the positives is it lowers inhibition, so you feel more open to talk about things you otherwise would not have talked about. But I think on the other side, also what happens, and also I think on the other side, is that all of a sudden if Gunther's date is already kind of predisposed towards exiting, right? Maybe she exits 30% faster now because she has a Tito in her. like that sort of a thing.
No, that's
and
true.
now Gunther's in the situation of like, I didn't grow up in a household where we just left, where we talked about this thing, or now I have this belief that, or this value where we talk about things, not leave me here embarrassed, right? But she's probably not doing that calculation because her calculator's a little diluted right now. Do you know what I mean? And this could happen to any one of us. It could be vice versa. And that's where I think the ultimate, detriment is. And then we think the next day, it's, in my opinion, it's kind of even worse when somebody's just lightly intoxicated or just lightly buzzed, because the next day they think they were right. And like, even if you explain to them, it's like, no, you looked at me a certain way. So I didn't look at you that way, right? You were a little louder. I wasn't loud, right? Like, well, you left. Well, I know I had to go because I had work tomorrow, right? It's like, you don't think you're wrong, right? So it's actually almost more tricky if you weren't completely, trapped.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That is fair to say. And I'll be curious too, Gunther. I'd be curious to follow the situation, because it's like, those are always really interesting dynamics of like, because you have everyone has their like dating persona, which is like, hey, this and that, blah, and then you with time you kind of start to scratch under the surface, and you're like, well, what the fuck was that? Yeah. So it's like, I mean that's kind of one of those things that you kind of look at, and I guess it all depends on how you feel about it, or like what that implies down the road, or there's also like I'd be curious how old she is and all that other stuff. Like
Delco said it's like adopting a rescue dog. No, I mean that's what we all are. We all are rescue dogs. Definitely.
Man.
It's very interesting. So then Gunther said the next morning she was like, "Wow." She said surprised I wasn't mad. Okay, so I was just disappointed in how it was handled. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And Gunther, what I think you did there was you expressed disappointment. You helped her work through something. I think you established more of a team bond that way. And then also you calibrated, in my opinion, your emotions correctly. Like, okay, you goofed, right? Like, this is how we handle this here. Not a big deal. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed, but I'm not extremely angry at you. Because I think that just exacerbates the situation when somebody is not properly calibrated and doesn't have the right emotion for the right situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I think that comes from like achieving some level of inner security, where it's like people be like, you fucking embarrassed me, I was there. And it's just like, whatever. You can kind of forego that and be like, where did you just go and why? And you're like, okay, well, don't, like if your true desire is to like, I guess like abandon me in a Chili's or whatever you guys are like, whatever you guys are doing. It's like, I mean, wherever you're eating, it's just like, it just makes me wonder. It's always just like, is it like, this is my paranoid brain. I'm like, is there like a level of drama that is like inherent in this? Or is this kind of, were you having like a serious emotional reaction? Because I always have to watch myself from being like, taking the bleakest, most like negative view on a thing, rather than being let me try to genuinely understand what the hell's going on here.
Right.
So that's pretty tight.
Cool. Awesome, dude. What's coming up for the week, buddy?
Dude, this week I'm going to finish the final level of meditation, which I'm very excited about.
Awesome.
And so I'm going to try to finish that this week. Today, all I'm doing this week today is just like fleshing out the script of that. And that's going to be the main thing, because once that's done, the week after that, I'm launching into doing that whole program, which will be a pretty in-depth thing for the Psych Nov. Like, you can open the website eventually, and it'll just be boom, boom, boom. Like the whole philosophy I have for it will be like neatly put in little tiny pods of videos, rather than like, 9 hour-and-a-half long things of me on a fucking Prezi, like rambling on it, so.
I love it, man. Awesome.
What you doing?
Cool. For me, our Ohio office is out here this week. Been entertaining them. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Been entertaining them and their family since Friday. And they're staying out here all through until next Tuesday. But we're doing goal sessions today for the company, which is going to be awesome. I'm going to go take them to like a super fancy hotel that overlooks the ocean. We're going to spend the entire day there, probably at the lunch table, planning out our goals for the next year. So yeah, man, I'm super pumped for it.
Damn, that'll be fun. Yeah. What time are you doing that?
Right after this.
Okay, dude.
Yeah.
Don't let me stop you. That'll be fun.
All right, dudes.
All right, brother.
Talk to everybody soon to see if there's any other comments. Hey, Gunther, thanks again for sharing the case study, bud. Appreciate it as always.
Definitely, man.
All right,
bro. See you Friday. Later on.
Later.